Let me ask you a very simple question. If you do everything like a normal person, then what happens to your money? Most people think that if they work hard, earn a stable salary, and just avoid making big mistakes, then everything will turn out fine. But the math doesn't agree with that. The median income of a full-time worker is about $52,000 a year before taxes. After everything is deducted, that number becomes $35,000 to $40,000. Meanwhile, the average household spends about $67,000 per year. Let that sink in for a moment. That means a lot of people who look fine out there are actually just spending everything they earn, or worse, spending on debt. Now let's talk about the future. The median retirement savings of Americans is about $65,000. If you withdraw using the 4% rule, that's about $300 a month in retirement. $300. And here's the most thought-provoking part. The average retirement age is 61, but the age to receive full Social Security is 67. That means there's a gap, and very little money to fill it. If you hear these numbers and feel a bit anxious, that is a completely reasonable reaction. Because the problem here is not that you're lazy, and it's not that you did everything wrong. The problem is this: if you handle money like the average person, then the average result is almost unavoidable. And in this video, I want to show you exactly why that system fails, and another simpler system that helps you not become the numbers you just heard. If you're watching this video, you're probably here because you're asking yourself a very familiar question. Am I doing okay with my money? You're not looking for a get-rich-quick scheme. You don't want to hear more generic advice like, just invest and everything will be fine. You just want to know one thing: with what I'm earning, am I actually on the right track? My name is Victor, and I help people understand money, personal finance, and how to build wealth, not by talking about luck and not by talking about rare success stories. We talk about systems that are simple enough for the average person to follow and disciplined enough to still work over 10, 20, even 30 years. In today's video, we're going to do two very specific things. First, I'm going to show you what the real financial picture of the average person actually looks like, not to scare you, but to help you see exactly where your starting point really is. And second, I'll show you a simple system for handling your money every time you get paid in the correct order, so you don't accidentally repeat the same results you just saw a moment ago. If this content helps you see your own money more clearly hit, like that's how you tell the algorithm and yourself, I want to do things differently. And if you're interested in managing your personal finances and even outperforming others, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if this information is useful to you. Now let's start with the most important question. Where is the average person really standing? And why do so few people ever make it past that point? Before talking about solutions, we need to clarify the real problem. Because if you misdiagnose it, every piece of advice that follows is meaningless. Many people think their financial problem is that their income isn't high enough. They believe that if they make more money, everything will automatically be better. A very familiar example goes like this. Someone earning $50,000 a year feels like they're always scraping by. They tell themselves, if I could just get to 70,000, things would be easier. Then they get a raise. But instead of relief, their life just becomes a little more expensive. A better apartment, a higher car payment. Spending that feels appropriate for the new salary. And at the end of the month, the account is still almost empty. When you look at the numbers we just went through, you'll notice something strange. There are a lot of people earning a perfectly fine income who still end up living stressed, with no emergency savings and no clear progress over time. That gives us a very important clue. The problem isn't how much money you earn. The problem is how your cash flow is handled after each paycheck. Most people don't have a clear system for their money. The process usually looks like this. They get paid. They pay what's due. They spend on life. And they hope, if there's anything left, they'll save or invest it later. It sounds reasonable. But think about a very simple example. If you wait until the end of the month to decide to save, then you're letting every decision you make during that month come before your goal. And in reality, if there's anything left, almost never happens. Because expenses tend to expand to consume income. A small payment here, an insignificant cost there, a swipe of the card because you're tired. High-interest debt quietly bleeds you every month, even when you're not paying attention. And the small decisions repeated hundreds of times a year are what actually determine the long-term outcome. This is the core point of this entire video. The average person isn't poor because they do things wrong. They're poor because they don't have the right order of priorities for their money. Their money isn't directed to the most important places first. It follows immediate pressure, not long-term goals. And when you repeat that process month after month, year after year, the final result looks very much like the statistics you just saw. But here's the good news. If the problem is the system, then the solution is also a different system. No hacks, no luck, no six-figure income required, just a correct order for handling your money every time you get paid. And to understand why the current system most people use fails, we need to look straight at the real numbers that the average person lives with every single day. Let's start with the most familiar thing, income. According to the latest data, the median income of a full-time worker is about $52,000 a year before taxes. After federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. The amount that actually reaches you is usually only around $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Now, put that number next to another one. The average spending of a U.S. household is about $67,000 per year. Pause here for a second. If most people bring home less than what they spend, then the question isn't how do they save? It's where does the difference come from? The answer is very simple. Debt. A lot of people out there look like they're doing fine. They pay rent on time. They travel. They buy new cars. But behind the scenes, they're borrowing from their own future to finance the present. Now let's talk about the thing most people avoid thinking about until it's too late. Retirement. The median retirement savings of Americans is about $65,000. That sounds not too bad until you put it into real context. If you withdraw using the 4% rule, $65,000 gives you about $2,600 a year. That's about $300 a month. $300. Even if you have no rent, no mortgage, and live extremely minimally, $300 a month isn't enough for food, utilities, healthcare, and the most basic expenses. So many people say, that's okay. I have Social Security. The average Social Security benefit is about $1,550 per month. And that's the average. If you've had years of low income periods of not working or part-time work, that number can be much lower. Not to mention another important thing. Social Security is not a guaranteed plan. It may exist, it may be reduced, or it may change over time. No one knows exactly what it will look like in 20 or 30 years. Now let's look at what quietly destroys long-term financial efforts. Credit card debt. The average household credit card debt is about $9,000, and the interest rate, usually somewhere between 15 and 25%. Let's take a very simple example. If you're paying 20% interest on $9,000 of credit card debt, you're losing $1,800 a year just to interest. Not principal, just interest. No long-term investment can offset that. You can't invest at 7 or 8% while losing 20% somewhere else and expect things to balance out. This is why so many people feel like they're doing everything right, but their money never grows. Finally, let's talk about net worth, the number that reflects your overall financial health. The median net worth of people under 35 is about $14,000. If you're 23 or 25, that might be acceptable. But if you're in your early 30s and still hovering around that level, that's a very clear signal that the current system isn't producing progress. Now connect these numbers together. The average retirement age is 61. And when someone reaches that age, they may live another 20 to 25 years. That means a lot of people spend nearly 40 years working, only to enter the longest phase of their lives with very little financial margin. And here's the important thing to remember. These are not statistics of failures, not lazy people, not people who didn't try. These are the statistics of people who don't have a clear money system. And if you don't change that system, then the outcome is almost predetermined. If you hear all the numbers we just went through and feel a bit weighed down, that's not because you're weak. It's because the math is telling the truth. Let's look at it one more time, not to scare you, but to help you understand. If you handle money like the majority, get paid, spend, pay what's due, and hope the rest will take care of itself, then the numbers you just saw are almost unavoidable results. Not because you're not smart enough, not because you didn't try, but because that system is designed to produce average results. And this is a very important point. Most people don't fail suddenly. They don't collapse because of one big wrong decision. They just repeat a default process month after month. A process in which spending has higher priority, then saving comes last, if there's anything left, and investing is something for later. And over time, those small choices accumulate into very large numbers. But there is good news. If the result is a product of the system, then you don't need to change yourself. You just need to change the order. So let me ask you another question. What are the people who don't fall into these statistics doing differently? They don't earn double the income. They don't have secret tricks. And they're not more disciplined than you. They simply have a very specific system for their money every time they get paid. A system in which the most important things are handled first, emotional decisions are removed, and money is put in the right places before it has a chance to be spent. In the next section, I'll show you exactly what that system looks like. Not theory, not generic formulas, but a clear practical sequence suited for 2026 and the years after that. Before talking about any steps, we need to agree on one single rule. It's not what you do with your money. It's the order in which you do it. The same amount of money, the same level of income, but two different orders will create two completely different financial lives. The system I'm about to share is not based on motivation, not based on emotion, and it does not assume that you always make perfect decisions. It's designed to work even when you're tired, busy, or don't want to think about money. When you've just gotten paid, the first place your money needs to go is minimum debt payments. Not to get rich, but to avoid falling into a spiral. The reason is very simple. Payment history and debt levels make up most of your credit score. About 65% of your total FICO score comes from these two factors. That's why the average FICO score is around 715, while many people are still carrying about $9,000 in credit card debt. They're not bad with money. They're just keeping things from collapsing. And this is important. At this step, you don't need a debt payoff strategy. You just need to make sure there are no late payments, no fees, no penalty interest, no credit damage. Think of this step as keeping yourself afloat. We'll swim faster later. But first, don't sink. This step may sound small, but it's the biggest lever in the entire system. Discipline is secondary. System design is primary. The reason is very simple. You can't spend money you never see. When money is automatically moved the moment you get paid toward debt, toward savings, toward investments, you remove the psychological factor from the equation. You no longer have to make the right decision every month. The system has already decided for you. Spending 15 minutes setting up automatic transfers can have a bigger impact than many years of trying to be more disciplined. After minimum debts are handled and the system is automated, now we talk about the cost of living your life. This is your monthly operating budget: rent or mortgage, food, healthcare, transportation, the things that keep your life running. The important thing here isn't squeezing every dollar. It's knowing exactly how much your life actually costs. The classification is very simple. Needs, the essentials, wants, the things that make life more enjoyable. Savings, your future self. A common ratio is 50-30-20. But in reality, it might be 60-30-10 or 40-30-30. The exact numbers matter less than knowing what they are. And always leave a buffer, not because you plan to spend it all, but because life rarely goes exactly as planned. This operating budget is what keeps you from consuming your entire income. It creates a clear boundary between living and spending. After you know how much your life costs each month, the next question is very simple. If your income disappeared for a period of time, how long could you survive? That is exactly the purpose of an emergency fund. In the past 3 months of living expenses was considered enough. But in the current environment, economic volatility, mass layoffs, and less stable income, 4 to 6 months, is a more realistic target. Not because you're pessimistic, but because you're prepared. This fund is not for investing, not for optimizing. It has only one job: to keep you from panicking when life goes off plan. The most appropriate place for an emergency fund in 2026 is a high-yield savings account. Right now, interest rates are typically around 3.5 to 4%. Not very high, but liquid and stable. This is the direct counterweight to volatility and layoffs. It doesn't make you rich, but it buys you time. Once you have the ability to survive in the short term, it's time to think about the long term. The next step in the system is investing for retirement, and it needs to be prioritized early, not when you have time. Wherever you are, 401k, pension, RRSP, or any equivalent system, the principle is the same. The target is 10 to 15% of income, and at a minimum, enough to capture the full employer match if there is one. Employer match is not a good return, it's free money. And ignoring it is the same as refusing part of your own income. The most important thing here is not picking the right stock or predicting the market. It's time. The power of compound interest far outweighs earning a few extra $1,000 a year. A correct system repeated long enough will beat high income without discipline. Now we return to debt, but in a different way. Not to keep things from collapsing, but to eliminate what is quietly killing the system. High interest debt. One very simple rule: if the interest rate is above 15%, it needs to be prioritized. You can choose Avalanche, pay off the highest interest debt first. Snowball, pay off the smallest debt first to build momentum. Either works. The best method is the one you actually follow through on. But one thing doesn't change. You cannot invest at 7% or 8% while losing 20% somewhere else. Markets can fluctuate. Returns are never guaranteed, but credit card interest is guaranteed. Eliminating high-interest debt isn't a flashy step, but it's the step that frees the entire system so the rest of it can actually work. When you've protected yourself from short-term risk invested for the long-term future and eliminated the debts that are bleeding the system now, you can go further. This is the investment order I always come back to. First, employer match. Never skip free money. Second, Roth. And third, taxable accounts. The reason for this order isn't because it's the most optimal on paper, but because it aligns with how money is taxed over time. In a Roth, growth is tax-free when withdrawn. So this is the logical place for high-growth assets. In taxable accounts, simpler is better. Index funds, low cost, tax efficient, and easy to maintain over the long run. You don't need a perfect portfolio. You need consistency. An investment system that's repeated consistently will beat any complex strategy that gets abandoned halfway. And finally, let's talk about the income ceiling. Median income is about $52,000 a year, not because people lack effort, but because a single income source always has limits. This is why about 65% of self-made millionaires have at least 3 income streams. Not to work 80 hours a week, but to reduce dependence on a single source. In the context of AI layoffs and career volatility, income diversification is part of a defensive system. This doesn't need to be complicated. 1 to 5 hours a week is enough to start. One skill, one small project, one additional cash flow. And the most important thing is this: every extra dollar earned doesn't change the system. It goes back into the system. It increases the emergency fund. It increases investments. It accelerates compound interest. This is how you break through the income ceiling without betting your entire life on a single risky leap. After seeing this entire system, a natural question comes up. If it's that simple, why do most people still get stuck? The answer isn't because they don't know. Most people know they should save. They know credit card debt is bad. They know investing early is good. The problem isn't knowledge. The problem is how that knowledge is applied in real life. Most people aren't poor because they do things wrong. They're poor because they don't repeat the right order long enough. Pay attention to the default process most people follow. They spend first because that's what's immediately in front of them. They save later if there's anything left at the end of the month. And they invest if everything else is already okay. It sounds reasonable, but in reality, if there's anything left, rarely happens. Expenses tend to expand. Life always brings surprises. And emotion often beats logic in small decisions. So that default system doesn't fail instantly. It fails slowly, month by month, year by year, until you look back and realize you're standing very close to those average statistics. The irony is this: the people who escape the average don't do anything special. They simply reverse the order. They protect first, invest first, and only spend what's left. And more importantly, they repeat that process when there's no motivation. When they're tired, when they're busy, when life isn't going well. Because a system doesn't need motivation. It just needs to be repeated long enough. If you've listened this far, you've probably realized something important. You don't need to be richer than others. You don't need to earn double the income. You don't need a breakthrough. And you don't need to do anything especially extraordinary. You just need to not behave like the average person. The average person lets their money drift along with immediate pressure. The average person hopes everything will work itself out over time. But money doesn't reorganize itself. It only follows the system you allow to exist. So the right question isn't, when will I be rich? The right question is my money system running correctly every time I get paid? Because if the system is right, time will be on your side. And if the system is wrong, no level of income can save you in the long run. Wealth doesn't come from one big decision. It comes from not making small mistakes, repeated every month. If this video helps you see the path ahead more clearly, hit like. Not for me. Not. But for yourself. It's a simple commitment that you'll do things differently from the average. And if you want to keep learning how to build money through systems, not hacks, subscribe. We don't chase luck. We build things that last long enough. See you in the next video.